But the media's tamed down a little bit. They're liking us much better now, I think. If they don't, we'll have to just take them on again, and we don't want to do that.
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, that was Donald Trump speaking at Wall Street today, saying the media is tamed down a little bit. They like us much better now, but if they don't, then we'll just have to take them on again, and we don't want to do that. And of course, this comes in light of what we're seeing from, people like Joe and Mika over at MSNBC. Donald Trump obviously was Person of the Year for Time Magazine. And so there is this sense of obeying in advance, which of course is what a lot of folks do when we're faced with an autocratic government coming in. And so I guess my question here is, which do you think is worse, the fact that Donald Trump is coming out and saying it outright, or the fact that these media outlets and media figures are doing it?
Yeah, by the way, you missed a couple. I mean, let's not forget the billionaires row here. We got Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post, who not only pulled the editorial, right, which we all know about that story before the election, but since then has gone and had dinner and said all kinds of nice things about him during a presentation that he did with the New York Times. Right, during the New York Times Deal Book Conference, it was like a love fest about how Jeff Bezos, is a very trusting man who really trusts Donald Trump. And of course, we have the billionaire owner of the Los Angeles Times, who is essentially restructuring his entire newspaper in light of this. And don't sleep on Mark Zuckerberg. He's not exactly the typical media, but he does own Facebook and Threads and other media really important media distributors, and he just cut a check for the Trump inauguration and had and seems to want to make nice. So look, I think it is a disgrace what we are seeing from so many parts of legacy media, both at the more ground level and also at the higher institutional levels, and it is particularly disgraceful because these are the folks who oftentimes, in advance of the elections, lecture the rest of us about the importance of democracy. They're the ones who are lecturing us about how free press is the bedrock of democracy, that they hold the powerful to account. Well, I think Donald Trump got it right in the word that he used. He said he tamed them like a little puppy. He tamed them. And I have been scouring the social media and the mainstream media since he said it, and I'm not seeing any mainstream media reporters or outlets writing stories saying, "How dare he say that? We're not tamed."
Right, of course, because they are. Mark, have you given any thought to basically how to overcome this? Because as you know, when you have a lot of our media outlets in this country really drive the way people perceive politics and political figures in this country. And so if we already know that they're going to be completely acquiescent to the Trump administration out of fear for what may happen to themselves, then that's going to have an impact, a downstream impact on how a lot of people perceive this administration. So have you given any thought to how you come back from this? Because this really is the beginning of the descent into kind of state media, the exact state media that Trump wants to see.
Yeah, look, I think the answer is that legacy media was already dying. It was already facing a series of crippling blows that had it in decline. This is there is an old saying that things move slower than you think until they move faster than you think, and I think that is what we are seeing now with legacy media. It was declining slower than many people projected, but since the election, it is just an absolute free fall. And so I think the way this is going to sort itself out is you are going to have new independent media outlets that are not dependent on business interests for their survival, that are not dependent on billionaires who have multiple lines of business for their survival, but rather people like you. The thing about you, Brian, is you are unbought and you're unbossed. Fundamentally, behind Brian Tyler Cohen is not a banker, is not a corporate executive, is not a private equity firm, is not a venture capital firm. Behind Brian Tyler Cohen is literally Brian Tyler Cohen. So what will happen is people will come to appreciate the kinds of news and information you deliver. It's what I have tried to build with Democracy Docket, which also is unbossed and unbought and is fearlessly independent. but it is ultimately going to be these kinds of outlets that are going to wind up succeeding and are going to be rewarded in the marketplace. For all of the decline you are seeing in viewership and in readership among the legacy media, a lot of these independent media outlets, including Democracy.com, are actually seeing, we are seeing explosive growth in our subscribers and our paid members because there is an appetite for it.
And I would be crazy not to let people know that if you are not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, it is an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis. So I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Give it a try. Trust me, you will not regret it. Marc, I have had some pushback when I've spoken about this issue with folks on live streams and during videos. And that is this idea that, okay, if legacy media is declining, then will everything just become partisan media, and is that okay? So can I get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a difference between partisan media and independent media. I mean, the fact is, you can have independent media that spans the spectrum, and in fact, I subscribe to a number of independent media outlets, some of which are actually right of center. But they are independent. They are not the main. They are not owned by corporate interests. And I tend to read more and watch more on the left than I do on the right. But I think that there is a question of whether or not we are going to allow our media to be filtered through the lowest common denominator of what sells soap and what a billionaire feels like will offend Donald Trump, or whether we are going to have media outlets that are frankly more responsive to their viewers and their listeners and their readers than they are to those corporate interests. And so I think that that's the pushback. The fact is that every day when you make videos, you are judged by whether people want to buy what you are selling. In other words, do they want to spend their time, right? That's how they buy it, right? With their view, with their time, right. Their attention is
their attention, yeah.
Are you giving them something that they want to consume? And that is simply not the business model of most of the legacy media. I mean, many of the cable stations, they're actually just getting paid by cable stations to simply exist on their channels. For many of the newspapers, they're selling games and puzzles and recipes, and so and ads in the local community. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I don't have any problem with them selling those things, but I do think there is a place for independent media to really flourish.
Well, I think it's especially important right now because this election has really put in full view. I mean, this is something I spoke about in my book a few months before the election, but now I think people are more broadly beginning to understand the asymmetry at play in the two media ecosystems, which is, by the way, not to say that the New York Times and the Washington Post shouldn't exist, but I think that we have to disabuse ourselves on the left of this notion that those outlets are our message distribution system, because they're not. The right understands that if they spend all this time crafting the exact message that they want to craft, that they're not going to hand it to some potentially hostile institution to distribute that message. They know that they can hand that message exactly how they crafted it over to Fox News or OAN or Newsmax or Breitbart or Daily Wire, and they'll deliver it as it was intended. What the left doesn't understand is that when we have our carefully crafted message and deliver it to the New York Times isn't on our team. They are not the DNC. They're not aligned with the Democratic Party. Sure, their reporters may vote more for Democrats than Republicans. Who knows? I'm assuming that they do, but they're not part of our movement. And so that hasn't stopped the left all the while from continuing to pretend that they are. And so, we'll deliver our messages to the New York Times and see no need to build up a progressive media infrastructure on the left, because we just assume that ABC, CNN, NBC, New York Times, Washington Post are our message distribution system, and they're not. And so, which is, again, not to say that they shouldn't exist, because I believe what they do is important, but I think we have to recognize that if we want our message to get out there in the way that we intend it to get out there, much like the right has been able to do on their side, then we need to start building up progressive media, independent progressive media, to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's also a question of values. It's a value. It's ultimately like every other business. People are expressing where their values are. And if your values are aligned with the kinds of coverage that the legacy media do around democracy, then by all means, like, give your exclusives to the New York Times.
Right.
By all means, subscribe to the New York Times. But if your value system around democracy is more akin to what you hear on your show or what you read in Democracy Docket, then you should be watching your show. You should be subscribing to Democracy Docket. And the politicians and the political actors who share those values should be giving their exclusives and their content to those platforms, because they will not only build them up, but they will also promote the underlying value that they are trying to. I mean, one of the things that has driven me crazy for some time now is that many in the legacy media believe the U.S. Constitution begins with the first clause of the First Amendment and ends shortly thereafter. And when supporters of gun rights talk about the U.S. Constitution and the Second Amendment that way, we are quick to call them out and say, look, the entire Constitution is not embodied in the Second Amendment. Well, the entire Constitution is not embodied in just a free press. Yes, a free press is important, but so is the right to vote. So is the right for women to have bodily autonomy. So is the right for free and fair elections. And if you have a legacy media that is simply not reading, not sharing those other values, then it's not clear to me why people who want to advocate for a broader range of issues than just freedom of the press should be turning first and foremost to them.
And I think what will be a fortunate byproduct of all of this is that if people in the left more broadly start subscribing and focusing and giving attention to progressive independent media, that will help shift the Overton window that the right has just dominated in. So we have not had partisan left-wing media in this country. We've had partisan right-wing media. And so that's what constantly drags legacy media, the mainstream media, although I don't use that word anymore because the internet has become much more mainstream than legacy media anyway. But that has constantly dragged the mainstream media to the right, because there was nothing to bring them farther left. And I think now, by virtue of people giving their most valuable resource, which today is time in an attention economy, giving them that attention, that will kind of show, these legacy media sources that, hey, maybe there is some inherent value in tacking left every once in a while, as opposed to just taking our cues from everything that we hear on the right, on partisan right-wing media.
Right. Now, I have very little hope that legacy media will correct. Like, this is where maybe you and I have a slight difference of agreement. I actually think Donald Trump got it exactly right. Like, Donald Trump has not even taken office. Okay, Donald Trump is still the president-elect, and yet he has managed to achieve what he has achieved, which is no small feat. He has, as he said, he has tamed the mainstream media, and he has made clear that they are being nicer to him, and that he knows, not he suspects, he knows that if he needs to call them back into line, he can just pull on that leash and they will come back into line. And so we have not yet begun the administration, and that is the relationship that they have. And there are a lot of reasons why they have that relationship. Number one, you and I, we don't seek access to Donald Trump's White House. We're not looking to curry favor in what order we get called on in the Brady conference,
in fact, I don't think it would be too safe if you or I went into the Trump White House.
Correct. Right. So let's just start with the basics, which is that we seek no access from the Trump administration, either in the White House or its various agencies. Number one. Number two, we don't have business interests that are collateral. We don't launch rockets into space. We don't sell cloud servers. We're not trying to get government contracts. Right? There's nothing else we are looking for. And that is simply not true for most of the ownership structure of the legacy media. So the truth is, Donald Trump has a lot of levers over the legacy media, and he knows it, and he's willing to use them. And he has already seen results. So I think that if there's a message I'm delivering to you out there, it is, you need to find an ecosystem that you believe in and you trust. I think Brian needs to be a part of that. I hope Democracy Docket's part of it. But, one of the things about Brian that I give a lot of credit to is he shares the credit with others. And so he, from time to time, will tell you, like, you ought to check out this person or that person. And he's a really good source for that. He has turned me on to other, frankly, outlets. And sometimes I'm like, hey, Brian, but don't they compete with you? Aren't you? And he's like, no. Like, I want to promote that. And so, there is a spirit of cooperation among progressive news outlets and progressive news commentators. And I think everyone watching ought to take advantage of that.
Well, this is an instance where I would say that a rising tide lifts all ships. So again, to that exact point, I would highly recommend for anybody watching right now to sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Please help support good, progressive, independent media here. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.